Most men think the secret to holding a woman's attention is giving her even more of it. More texts, more explaining, more availability, more comfort and reassurance. They believe that showing up constantly makes them more important in her eyes. But human nature usually works the other way around. The more predictable you become, the less people actually notice you. When someone knows they can reach you anytime, without fail, your attention slowly stops feeling special. It turns into something expected, and anything expected eventually loses its power to move people. This is where the dark psychology behind ignoring a woman starts. Not as a trick, not as manipulation, but simply as an understanding of how people work. People notice change. People notice absence. People notice when something they took for granted is suddenly not guaranteed anymore. Picture a man who is always reachable. Every text gets answered right away. Every quiet moment makes him anxious. Every small shift in her behavior sends him chasing for answers. Without realizing it, he's sending a message that his attention has no limits. And things with no limits rarely feel precious. Now picture the opposite. A man who has his own goals, his own sense of direction, someone who doesn't drop everything the moment feelings get involved. When he does give attention, it feels deliberate. When he stays quiet, it's not some strategy, it's because his world doesn't spin around her every reaction. That one difference changes the whole dynamic, because attention only carries weight when it's given freely, not out of desperation. People are naturally curious about shifts in behavior. When someone who used to always be available suddenly turns inward, focused on his own life, people take notice. Questions start forming. What happened? Why does he seem different now? Where has his focus gone? And the second curiosity shows up, attention follows right behind it. This is exactly why chasing someone constantly tends to kill attraction, while emotional control builds it. The harder someone chases for attention, the cheaper that attention starts to look. The more someone respects their own time and energy, the more other people start respecting it too. Here's the irony. Most men lose respect not because they cared too much, but because caring became their whole identity. They stop chasing growth. They stop chasing purpose. They stop investing in themselves. Their focus becomes entirely dependent on how someone else reacts to them. And that kind of dependency always drains your influence. The most powerful position isn't trying to make someone miss you. It's becoming so absorbed in your own growth that your attention simply isn't available on command. Because when silence comes from self-respect rather than insecurity, it creates something far stronger than any words could. It sparks curiosity, and curiosity is where the real psychology of silence truly begins. Once your attention stops being handed out freely, something interesting starts to unfold. The constant noise fades away, and curiosity begins to take its place. This is one of the most misunderstood parts of human psychology. Most people assume attention automatically creates value. In truth, attention only holds value when it's balanced. When it becomes endless, predictable, guaranteed, it often loses the exact impact it was meant to have. Think about how people naturally think. Nobody spends much time dwelling on what they already fully understand. They think about what they can't quite predict. They think about what feels uncertain. They think about whatever leaves questions lingering in their mind. This is why mystery has always held power. Not because it's manipulative, but because mystery is what sparks curiosity. And curiosity is what holds attention. When a man constantly explains himself, constantly updates someone on every detail of his day, constantly seeks reassurance, there's almost nothing left to wonder about. Every thought gets shared, every feeling gets exposed, every reaction becomes something she can predict before it happens. Over time, the whole connection loses its tension, and without tension, curiosity dies out. Now compare that to a man who stays calm, focused, and emotionally steady. He's not trying to seem mysterious. He's simply living his own life. He's focused on his goals. He's focused on his purpose. He's not chasing validation through constant conversation. Because of that, gaps naturally form, and the human mind can't help but fill in those gaps. People start wondering what's on his mind. People start wondering what's holding his attention. People start wondering why he seems so different now. The harder someone tries to force attention, the more unnatural it feels. The more someone stays focused on themselves, the more naturally attention tends to come to them. That's the paradox most people never fully grasp. The strongest presence is often built from what's left unsaid. Think about conversations you've had. Sometimes one moment of silence hits harder than 10 minutes of talking. Why is that? Because silence forces reflection. Silence creates space. Silence lets the other person think instead of just reacting on impulse. Most people feel uncomfortable with silence because they think they need to fill every gap. They believe every pause demands an explanation. Every misunderstanding needs a defense. Every emotional moment calls for immediate action. But emotionally grounded people understand something different. They understand that not every feeling needs a reaction. Not every situation demands a response. Not every silence has to be broken. This kind of self-control creates a completely different energy. It communicates confidence, it communicates patience. It shows that your emotional state isn't hanging on someone else's approval. And that's rare to find. People are naturally drawn to those who seem comfortable in their own skin. When someone constantly chases attention, they're communicating need. When someone stays focused on their own path, they're communicating value. The difference is subtle, but it carries real weight because people tend to respect self-sufficiency far more than they respect desperation for approval. This is exactly why silence becomes such a powerful piece of emotional control. It's not about going quiet just to provoke a reaction out of someone. It's about refusing to let every emotion control your behavior. It's about staying grounded while others get reactive. It's about understanding that your worth doesn't rise just because you're always available. And once curiosity starts replacing predictability, another shift takes place. People start paying closer attention, not because you demanded it, but because your absence and emotional steadiness naturally make them reconsider the value of something that's no longer constantly there. Curiosity might grab attention, but curiosity alone can't build lasting respect. Eventually, every relationship reaches a point where emotions get involved. Expectations show up, disappointments happen, misunderstandings occur. And this is exactly where most people reveal how emotionally mature they really are. The average person reacts instantly. They react to every message. They react to every delay. They react to every shift in behavior. They react to every emotion that crosses their mind. And because they react so fast, they often lose control of the entire situation. This is why emotional control is one of the rarest forms of power out there. Not because it lets you control other people, but because it stops other people from controlling you. Think about how many people wreck their own position simply because they can't manage their emotions. One moment of frustration makes them say things they'll regret later. One moment of insecurity pushes them to seek reassurance they don't even need. One moment of jealousy makes them act without thinking. The emotion itself was never really the problem. The real issue is losing control. Human nature respects stability. People naturally trust those who stay calm under pressure far more than those who get emotional at the first sign of a challenge. Why is that? Because emotional stability sends a signal of confidence. It sends a signal of self-respect. It shows that your inner peace doesn't depend on outside circumstances. This is where the art of silence becomes so powerful. Silence is often mistaken for weakness. In reality, silence usually takes more strength than speaking ever does. Anyone can react. Anyone can defend themselves. Anyone can spill their emotions in a heated moment. But staying calm when every emotion is screaming for a reaction, that takes discipline. And discipline is what creates real power. Picture a situation where expectations aren't being met. Most people rush to find answers right away. They crave certainty. They crave reassurance. They want the discomfort gone as fast as possible. But emotionally strong people understand something important here. Not every uncomfortable feeling needs an immediate reaction. Sometimes emotions need time to settle before you respond. Sometimes silence brings clarity. Sometimes a little distance gives you perspective. The problem with acting on impulse is that it usually serves a temporary emotion rather than your long-term interests. What feels so urgent in the moment often looks completely unnecessary just one day later. Emotional control protects you from yourself in a very real way. It creates a gap between what you feel and what you do. That gap gives wisdom room to step in where impulse would usually take charge, and this shifts how people see you. When someone notices that you don't react to every emotional trigger, they start viewing you in a new light. You come across as more grounded, more centered, more sure of yourself, not because you're faking strength, but because your feelings no longer run your behavior. This trait is becoming rare in a world that pushes people to react instantly to everything. The truth is, constantly expressing every emotion doesn't always signal strength. Sometimes it signals dependence. Sometimes it signals insecurity. Sometimes it signals a hunger for validation. But emotional control sends a far more powerful message. It says you own yourself. It says your peace of mind belongs to you alone. And once your emotional state belongs to you, other people lose the easy ability to shake it. That's why the strongest people aren't the ones who never feel disappointment, doubt, or frustration. They're the ones who feel those things without letting those things control them, because the true power of silence isn't about what it does to others. The true power of silence is what it does inside you. It builds patience, it builds discipline, it builds self-respect. And once you reach that level of emotional mastery, something remarkable starts happening. People begin seeing your presence in a whole new way, because what stays calm, steady, and not constantly available often feels far more valuable than what's always around. As emotional control deepens, another powerful psychological truth starts to surface. People rarely appreciate something when they're certain it will always be there. Certainty breeds comfort, but comfort often dulls awareness. This is why so many relationships, friendships, and bonds slowly lose their spark over time. Not because people stop caring, but because they stop paying attention. Human nature has a strange pattern. People tend to recognize value most clearly when they feel its absence. Not a permanent absence, not manipulative games, but the natural kind of absence that happens when someone becomes focused on their own life. Most people pour so much energy into staying on someone's mind that they never give that person the chance to actually miss them. They constantly text, constantly explain, constantly chase reassurance. They become so available that their attention starts to feel routine, and whatever feels routine gets taken for granted. Think about how people react when something familiar suddenly shifts. The instant a routine breaks, people take notice. The instant a familiar presence fades, people take notice. The instant attention is no longer a given, people take notice. Why does this happen? Because distance brings perspective. When someone is always there, their worth can vanish behind familiarity. But when space opens up, the mind starts reflecting on what that presence truly meant. This isn't manipulation, it's simple psychology. People weigh value more honestly when they can compare presence against absence. Picture a man whose entire world revolves around one person. Every choice, every thought, every priority centers on keeping that person's attention. Over time, he unknowingly signals that his whole world hinges on someone else's response. Now picture a different man. He cares deeply. He values the bond, but he also values his own path. He has goals. He has drive. He has responsibilities that extend beyond the relationship. Because of this, his attention stays balanced. His life keeps moving forward whether he gets attention back or not. This creates an entirely different dynamic because his presence feels deliberate instead of constant. And deliberate attention will always outweigh unlimited attention. One of the biggest mistakes people make is assuming that being more available automatically makes them more important. In truth, importance usually comes from the quality of presence, not how much of it there is. One person can give endless attention and still get overlooked. Another can give balanced, meaningful attention and leave a lasting mark. The difference comes down to perception. People are naturally drawn to what feels connected to purpose. When someone constantly chases attention, they're broadcasting need. When someone stays committed to their own goals, they're broadcasting self-respect. And self-respect changes how the world sees you. The irony is that people often earn more respect the moment they stop forcing it. They earn more appreciation the moment they stop demanding it. They earn more value the moment they stop trying to prove it, because value shows itself most clearly when it stands on its own. This is why absence carries so much weight. It gives people space to reflect. It gives people space to compare. It gives people space to notice what they overlooked when everything felt predictable. But the deeper lesson here isn't about making someone miss you. The deeper lesson is about building a life so meaningful that your attention naturally becomes something worth having. Because once your focus shifts from chasing validation to pursuing purpose, people start seeing you in a different light. And that shift leads to the most important transformation of all. The moment you stop measuring your worth by someone else's approval and start building unshakable self-respect from the inside out. Once you understand the power of absence, an even deeper truth starts to surface. The real point of silence isn't to make someone think about you. The real point of silence is to stop believing your worth depends on someone else's attention. This is where so many people get stuck. They spend years chasing validation without even realizing it. Every message becomes a test. Every reply becomes a measurement. Every interaction becomes proof of whether they matter or not. Slowly, their self-worth gets tangled up in someone else's behavior. And that's one of the most dangerous places anyone can put themselves in, because the moment your confidence depends on someone else's approval, you're handing them power they never earned. Think about how many people reshape themselves just to be accepted. They change their opinions, they change their priorities, they change their boundaries, they turn into whoever they think the other person wants. At first, it feels like closeness, but over time, it turns into dependence. And they stop asking, "What do I actually want?" and start asking, "What will keep them from leaving?" That question quietly chips away at self-respect, because self-respect demands honesty. It demands authenticity. It demands the courage to stay true to yourself even when approval isn't guaranteed. The dark psychology behind silence isn't that it makes people chase you. The deeper psychology is that it forces you to face your own dependence on validation. When communication slows, a lot of people grow uneasy. Not because anything is actually wrong, but because they suddenly realize how much reassurance they were leaning on from another person. Without that reassurance, insecurity creeps in, fear creeps in, doubt creeps in. And this is exactly where growth begins, because instead of running toward more validation, you get the chance to build something sturdier. You get the chance to build self-respect. Self-respect is not the same as confidence. Confidence often grows out of success. Self-respect grows out of standards. It comes from knowing your worth even when no one's applauding you. It comes from holding on to your values even when approval is nowhere in sight. It comes from refusing to abandon yourself just to hold on to someone else's attention. Most people never get here because they're too busy chasing outside approval. They want everyone to like them, everyone to understand them, everyone to approve of them. But that's an impossible goal. No matter who you are, someone will misread you, someone will reject you, someone will lose interest, someone will walk away. And if your happiness hinges on stopping those things from happening, you'll spend your whole life worn out. Emotionally strong people understand something different. Their worth doesn't rise just because someone picks them. Their worth doesn't fall just because someone leaves. Their worth exists apart from both outcomes. This mindset changes everything because once you stop chasing validation, your behavior becomes more natural. You stop forcing conversations. You stop over-explaining yourself. If you stop hunting for reassurance you don't actually need, you stop treating someone else's attention as proof of your own worth. And ironically, that's usually when you become more respected, not because you're trying harder, but because you're finally acting from self-respect instead of insecurity. There's something powerful about a person who values themselves no matter who stays and who goes. They carry themselves differently. They speak differently. They make decisions differently. Their actions are guided by principle rather than fear. And that's exactly where true emotional independence begins. Once your self-worth stops depending on someone else's approval, you become someone who is far harder to manipulate, and that's when you finally understand the real lesson hidden inside silence. It was never about controlling another person. It was always about gaining full control over yourself. Everything we've talked about comes down to one final truth. Most people get power completely wrong. They believe power means controlling others. They believe power means making someone run after them. They believe power is about stirring emotions, sparking attraction, or becoming someone impossible to forget. But real power runs much deeper than that. Real power is mastery over yourself. Because if someone else's actions can shift your mood, then they hold power over you. If someone else's attention decides how confident you feel, then they hold power over you. If someone else's approval determines how much you value yourself, then they hold power over you. And here's the truth most people never notice. They live their entire lives this way. Their happiness goes up and down depending on how others treat them. Their confidence rises and falls based on how much attention they get. Their peace of mind shifts depending on someone else's actions. That isn't power. That's dependence. The art of silence was never meant to control another person. It was always meant to help you take back control of yourself. Just think about how much energy people burn trying to manage other people's feelings. They want to be understood by everyone. They want to be appreciated by everyone. They want people to react exactly the way they hoped. But no matter how much effort you put in, you simply cannot control another human being. You can't control how they feel. You can't control what they choose. You can't control what matters most to them. You can't control whether they stay in your life or walk away. And the harder you try, the more frustration builds because you're fighting a battle you were never meant to win. The moment you finally accept this truth, something unexpected happens. A strange sense of freedom shows up. You stop chasing outcomes you can't control. You start focusing on yourself instead. You stop obsessing over what someone else is doing. You start paying attention to your own actions. You stop chasing certainty. You start creating stability from within. And that shift changes everything because true emotional mastery was never about hiding your feelings. It's about refusing to let those feelings control you. You'll still feel disappointment sometimes. You'll still feel drawn to someone. You'll still feel unsure. You'll still feel loss. But none of those emotions get to decide how you act anymore. They stop controlling your choices. They stop shaping who you are. Instead, they simply move through you, like passing weather instead of taking over your life. This is exactly why emotionally disciplined people seem so different from everyone else. It's not because they're smarter. It's not because they're tougher. They simply understand where true power actually comes from. It comes from self-control. It comes from discipline. It comes from staying grounded even when everything around you feels chaotic. So many people spend years trying to figure other people out while completely ignoring themselves. But the person who learns to master himself gains something far more powerful. He gains real freedom. Freedom from needing constant validation. Freedom from being emotionally dependent on others. Freedom from the fear of being rejected. Freedom from feeling like he has to explain himself to everyone around him. And in today's world, freedom might be one of the rarest kinds of power there is. Because once your peace no longer depends on someone else's attention, you become someone who can't easily be manipulated. Once your confidence no longer depends on someone else's approval, you become someone who can't easily be controlled. Once your self-worth no longer depends on someone else being around, you become truly emotionally independent. That's the real lesson hidden inside silence. It was never about making someone miss you, never about making someone chase you, never about making someone think about you constantly. It's about becoming so emotionally steady that your happiness, your confidence, and your peace are no longer held hostage by anyone else's actions. And once you reach that kind of self-mastery, something powerful happens. Silence stops being a tactic you use, and it becomes a natural reflection of your inner strength. Because the person who has truly mastered his emotions, who respects his own worth, and who stays calm no matter who stays or who leaves, holds a kind of power that nobody can ever take away from him.